we negotiated agreements with multifamily property owners on their behalf. And then over time, they ended up taking that role in-house and limiting their third-party vendors. We sit there, we're like, okay, we're sitting at the negotiating table already, right? Here we are without a side. Why don't we just move our chair over? Because what we found in doing that work for the cable operators was a lot of times owners just didn't realize that they could make money from these contracts. They didn't realize that they had some ability to generate additional revenue.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Journey to Multifamily Millions. I'm your host, founder and CEO of Zana Investments, Tim Little. And on today's show, we have with us Kevin Garder. Kevin is founder and president of Multifamily Utility Solutions, a firm that helps multifamily property owners increase revenues and reduce expenses by negotiating agreements with utility providers. He is also the author of Change Your Thinking, Ignite Your Life, a book intended to help people learn about the power of positive self-talk and how to incorporate it into their lives. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tim. I appreciate being a guest.
Yeah, and it is great to have you. This is a unique topic that we're going to be talking about today, but I'm sure anything that can save operators money is going to be a topic of interest for those who do have these properties. So I'm ready to dig into it. I did give everyone a very high-level overview of your background, but on this show, we really like to get into the details of how you got started on your journey. So please take us back to the beginning and tell us how you got to where you are today.
I'll take it back to a pivotal point that probably this company wouldn't exist had I made a different decision in my life. And that was that I was desperately looking for a job out of college, child on the way, and I had two job offers: sell cable TV door to door or sell replacement windows. And I opted for cable TV because to me, it sounded like it would be more exciting. And so I sold cable TV door to door for a couple of years, and then I worked my way up and I just continued to advance and move. I was at corporate Comcast for a little while, and I ended up being a VP of operations in the Midwest. And as the company grew, I love that entrepreneurial spirit when they were smaller. And I wanted that. I sought that out. So I decided to go on my own and start my own company. Initially, what we did is we were a third-party vendor for Charter and Comcast, and we negotiated agreements with multifamily property owners on their behalf. And then over time, they ended up taking that role in-house and limiting their third-party vendors. We sit there, we're like, okay, we're sitting at the negotiating table already, right? Here we are without a side. Why don't we just move our chair over? Because what we found in doing that work for the cable operators was a lot of times owners just didn't realize that they could make money from these contracts. They didn't realize that they had some ability to generate additional revenue. And so we started marketing ourselves on behalf, and that's when we changed the name of the company to Multifamily Utility Solutions. We still have our parent company, Telecom Marketing Strategies, but this one was designed solely to help multifamily property owners increase the value of their assets.
Awesome. And I do want to dig into some aspects that you spoke about there. You started with the door-to-door piece. And I think what's interesting about that is I've heard a lot of people talk about how that hard selling, that door-to-door, face-to-face selling is one of the most important skills that an individual can learn. And I wanted to see if that was your perspective and what value that experience brought to the present day.
Oh, absolutely. It was pivotal in my growth and my learning for sales, because at that point, you're trying to sell a relatively low ticket, low price item, right? So you've got the whole sales process in one short period of time. You have to go from introduction to product to sale most of the time on a single visit. So it really helped me understand the sales process in its most basic elements, overcoming objections and looking for buying signs and things like that. And it also taught me that sometimes you're not going to win everyone. As part of sales, it taught me to deal with rejection and trying to find out where I could do better. So it was a great process. And if anybody can, it was hard work. Don't get me wrong. It was evenings, it was weekends, it was door to door, right? And where do I decide to start my door to door career? Fort Wayne, Indiana in December, right? Probably not the easiest place to do that, but it absolutely helped me learn so much. And I think it was vital experience.
Yeah. And it's experience that I wish that I would have gotten at some point early on. I remember when I was growing up, we lived in New Jersey for a little while and that got really expensive, property taxes, et cetera. So we started to move down south and moved to West Virginia. And my dad decided, okay, I need to find work here. So he was going to sell Kirby vacuum cleaners. And if anybody knows anything about Kirby vacuum cleaners, I think Rainbow was the other one, something like that. They're really expensive vacuum cleaners that you sell door to door. So as you can imagine, very limited pool for that kind of product. And we were in West Virginia, and I'm talking like rural West Virginia. So just imagine the challenge of trying to sell $1,000 vacuums to people that are essentially in poverty in rural West Virginia. Needless to say, it didn't go too well, but I don't fault him for that at all. So it can certainly be challenging, but you talked about a lot of valuable lessons that you got out of that, the overcoming challenges. And I think just coming out of your show and being able to talk to people on a regular basis and becoming much more social, I would have to imagine, even if that's not how you naturally were when you started.
It really wasn't. By definition, I tended to be an introvert, but in that window of work time, you really needed to be an extrovert. You had to be observant too. That was the other thing. If somebody welcomes you into their home, you have to pick up on cues, right? You have to look for what pictures or hobbies or pets or things like that so that you can try and relate to them and find some common ground to make you more of a visitor than a stranger.
Yeah, no, that's great insight. And so you talked about how you started out basically as the broker in between the cable company and the multifamily property owner, and then eventually had to shift your seat over, as you said, to really being the representative for the multifamily property owners in these negotiations. Can you talk us through, one, what these negotiations look like and what exactly do these multifamily owners have to gain by negotiating for these like cable contracts, for example?
Right. First of all, I deal with a lot of people who are new in the multifamily. They're buying their first property, or larger companies that are buying a new property. And so what a lot of people don't realize is, for example, I mentioned Fort Wayne, Indiana, right? So Comcast has the franchise to operate in Fort Wayne, Indiana. If I'm a homeowner in Fort Wayne and I want Comcast to have come on my property and provide service, I'm allowed to do that. The franchise that they have only gives them the right to the public easement. Now, let's say, Tim, you own a multifamily property in Fort Wayne and I'm your resident. As that resident, I want their service. I can't give them the right to be on your personal property, which is the multifamily apartment or mobile home community. So they then have to have an agreement with you that allows them on your property to provide service to me, your resident. And so a lot of people as the owner, and that's one of the big myths, is that I don't need an agreement if I'm the owner with Comcast because I'm not the one paying the bill. But you have value in this because you are actually the one that has to give them permission to be on your property in order for them to provide their service to your residents. And a lot of people don't realize that, right? I don't pay for the service, so why do I need a contract? And so a lot of what we do is educate people, especially people that are brand new in the multifamily space.
All right. So if that's the case, so basically a tenant can't choose who their provider is because it has to be approved by the owner. Is that correct?
No, so the resident can choose any of the providers that the owner has given permission to be there. But the
Right.
owner only has the permission for the physical land. So let's say you're in a market where Comcast is and AT&T both are, right? Because over time, internet didn't used to exist. It was cable TV and phone service. And both of those companies got into the internet business. So now both of them are most likely providing service at that community. And if they have an agreement with the owner, they can then have an option to take service from either one. Somebody gets internet service through their cell phone or those little devices now that are out by Verizon and T-Mobile, right? That's through the airwaves. Anybody can get that. There's no way the owner can stop T-Mobile or Verizon or anybody from providing that service because they're not using their land, their facilities. They're not putting anything, any structures on, any wiring on or in their properties. It's all through and similar to like satellite service. So you're not really limiting the options, but the company that's providing facilities on your property needs your permission to be
Right. So you're talking primarily the hardwired stuff.
the hardwired stuff. Exactly. Yeah. People have
Oh,
said, can I get money from DirecTV and satellite providers and Verizon? And the answer is no, because they aren't using your facility.
and I guess that raises another point for me as a question for me as an owner. Do I have the right to tell a tenant that they can't have something like DirecTV because then they're required to install something onto my building?
Okay. And this is where my business partner, who is an attorney, always advises me to say, I'm not an attorney, but from what we've seen, you can, in your lease, say that the resident is prohibited from affixing anything structure to your property for obvious reasons, right? Do you really want to give them the ability to put a satellite dish on your roof, thus potentially causing, negative impact on your property? My understanding is that yes, you can put that in a lease to prevent them from that because it's you protecting your asset. It's not you limiting choice or their options. It's you protecting your asset.
And I think that's the important aspect that you keyed in on there is that there's no reason for me to specify, hey, you can't have DirecTV or whatever their competitor is. It's you can't drill anything into my
Right.
building, whatever it is. It almost doesn't matter. And that way you cover yourself legally too. There's no preference shown.
Oh, I've
That
heard
makes it
horror stories, Tim, where people have bought properties and there's been so many dishes out there that they've had leaks in the roof and things like that, because depending on who does the installation, they may not care. It may not be a professional installation. And it's really caused them extreme additional costs that they've had to incur after they've already acquired the asset because of that.
Yeah, it's absolutely a legitimate concern and something for folks to think about in their leases. All right, talk me through an actual example of how property owner can make money from one of these negotiated contracts, i.e., say I have a 100-unit building and you come to me and we're going to negotiate to have cable provider A come and be our, provider of choice. I guess you could probably give me
Yes.
the right words there so that I'm not legally incorrect. But what does that look like and how much do we stand to gain? And what does that benefit look like? Is it monthly, quarterly, annual, etc.?
Yeah. And actually use the exact right term, provider of choice is really how we try to position it, because you're not limiting choice, but you can have a provider of choice or provider of preference, right? in that example, I used Comcast and AT&T are both in there. Now, let me first of all say, none of these guys are probably in there without permission from somebody, right? But chances are, if you're looking at a 1980s or a 1990s bill, any agreement that may have been in place was probably at that time in the telecommunications world. A lot of those agreements were not registered. There was no easement. They weren't recorded. Companies have sold, properties have sold, and quite frankly, somehow there was an agreement in place. So if we can't find an agreement, our thing is we want a new agreement stating it. We're not accusing you of being here without permission, because that happened at one point. But likewise, the agreement is either no proof of it, nobody has a copy of it, or it's in a renewal status. So typically these agreements are about 10 years old. So if you've got a property that's over 10 years old, chances are that initial agreement is out of term. And that's also an opportunity for us to negotiate a new agreement for you. So that's what we do. And there's a lot of different terms, right? So the FCC last February 2022, passed a new ruling that says, look, we want there to be choice, right? We want residents to have choice. So you can't enter into an exclusive agreement that says we will kick everybody else off the property and you will be the only choice. But what you can do is you can say, look, in exchange for you compensating us, we will consider you our exclusive marketing partner. We will promote you over others, and we will tell people that you're our preferred provider of service. In exchange for that, it's called an exclusive marketing agreement. And these pertain to ones where the residents pay for their own service, right? So it's an exclusive marketing agreement. And let's say you do it with Comcast, and Comcast then says, okay, you're going to exclusively market us. In exchange for that, we're going to give you a one-time lump sum payment. But then because we want to incent you helping us market the service, we will pay you what's called revenue share, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a percentage of the revenue that they generate on a quarterly basis, then that then is paid to you. So the one-time upfront payment goes with whoever signs the agreement. The revenue share, since it's ongoing, passes on if you sell the agreement to the new owner, because you're no longer entitled to that revenue stream. So that then, and that's something else we help with, right? If we help you sign an agreement and you say, hey, Kevin, we're selling this property, all I want you to do is introduce me to the new owner and we'll get everything transferred over for you. That's part of the service we provide. Okay.
Okay.
The other thing you can do is what's called a non-exclusive marketing agreement, where you're just saying, look, we're going to let you on our site. You can pay us. And in this case, you may have non-exclusive marketing agreements from two providers. And so we just got to run the numbers and see how many people have the different services at your community. It may make sense to do non-exclusive marketing agreement with Comcast and another non-exclusive marketing agreement with AT&T. And that way you're saying, look, we've got both providers on site. We recommend you do this. We don't allow satellite dishes here or anything like that. The choice is really yours. But at least at that point, you're providing choice and you're promoting both of them, not one over the other. I will tell you that the percentage is going to be less because from their perspective, it's, they're not getting the favorable positioning. So they're not going to pay you as much, but in a lot of cases, they will pay you something.
And I imagine that there's a balance there, right? So if you have a property and half the tenants have Comcast and the other half have AT&T already when you're coming into it, because there was no exclusive marketing agreement prior to that, then it might make more sense just to continue on with what you have so that you get that little slice of the pie from each versus trying to do the turnover that would be required to grow the base of that exclusive provider. Is that correct?
Yeah, because most of the time, if you're doing exclusive marketing, the marketing is going to occur at the time of moving. So as the units turn, that's really where you are utilizing that exclusive marketing. You likewise, if anybody comes into the office, you're going to have only one provider's promotional materials and things like that. But that's where the real impact is when the turnover occurs.
Okay. And that makes sense. And I guess the next question would be, so I've seen some of this on my own properties, but how do you, or do you even support the marketing aspect for the owners? Because it's one thing to negotiate the rates, but if these people are not skilled marketers, it's like, all right, here's your unit, here's our preferred vendor, and that's it. We don't know necessarily how good a job they're doing, but our share depends on them being good marketers and growing that base.
Yeah. So you do know how well they're doing because you can track your revenue share payments and see, is this going up? Is this going down? But also most of the larger providers, especially if you have a 100-unit or larger property, they assign a sales rep from their firm to come around. So Spectrum or Comcast or AT&T would have somebody that has a routine. It's almost like a route salesperson, right? They're not actually selling the chips to the individual people that come in, but they're making sure that the shelves are stocked, to use another type of sales. So they're going to come, they're going to make sure you have all the most recent information. And if you have any questions, and so all the people in the office, I just actually coordinated a visit in Denver from Quantum Fiber to one of our partners who signed a deal. They said, look, our revenue share is not growing that much out here. Can we have somebody come visit the folks in the office, make sure they're handing out the right information, and make sure that they have whatever, if they have any questions, they can talk to them. So that's part of the process.
Yeah. And the other thing that I've seen is if property management is having some kind of event, right? A new ownership event or under new management or just a tenant appreciation event, they may have a booth or something to that effect dedicated to that exclusive provider so that they can promote their services.
The other thing is that you as the owner, right? What's more important? Hey, this leasing agent is helping us grow revenue share, but wow, we've got a lot of vacancies, right? Everything else pales in importance to occupancy rate. And so that's, especially if that's a struggle at that time, that's going to be more important than revenue share. But at the same time, the higher the occupancy rate, the more the revenue share is going to be.
All right. So I guess at what level does this make sense? How large should a multifamily property be before it makes sense to call you and start looking at this as a way to increase revenue and decrease expenses?
Absolutely, at a minimum 20 units. Below that, there's really no opportunity. The sweet spot is 100 and above. Because again, it's about buying power, right? They're going to probably give you a little bit more if you've got a 100-unit property than if you got a 20-unit property. And they also won't send people around to the smaller properties, but they also want the right to be there. They want to preserve that right to be there. They want to, if you do have somebody, they want to have you helping them market their service, things like that. But I tell people any 20 and above, because sometimes that's the other thing we do is we help increase your buying power. Because we maintain a database of all our clients and all their properties, and maybe there's other people in that market that have units available that we can combine your units with theirs and say, look, I've now got 3 owners. Collectively, they've got 200 units. Granted, one of them's only 20 units, but if we can get this done, can we, get that 20 in with the other 180? And so that's why we always like to have those smaller ones to throw in, because we may be able to do something for them.
Right. And so we talked a lot about the revenue side of the equation. What about the savings aspect? Because I did say up front that you help reduce expenses. And what does that look like? Yeah. And is that expenses just for the owner, or does this have the potential to reduce expenses for tenants as well, just through negotiated rates for them?
Yeah. So the one thing we didn't talk about is the other type of contract when it comes to cable and internet. So the one we talked about was one where the residents pay for their own service. So the owner's not on the hook for anything other than helping market the service, right? No financial liability. But there's also something called a bulk contract. And a bulk contract is where the owner basically buys the service, internet service, cable TV service, whatever they choose, from the provider in bulk, and they provide it as an amenity to their residents. And in that case, they can position it as, because they're buying it in bulk, they can, for example, let's say they buy it for $30 or $35, and the retail rate of that maybe is $75. They can then say to their resident, hey, look, as part of our rent, yes, you pay an extra $50 for internet service, but you're saving $25 over the retail rate. So that way the resident gets savings, but you're buying it for $35. So then if you're charging your resident $50, you're making $15.
Mm-hmm.
But you're on the hook for 100% of your units, regardless of occupancy. And I know that when we went through COVID, a lot of people were really worried about this. We see bulk more often if it's an A-class property, where it's less price sensitive and they just want more amenities, right? A-class property residents want more amenities typically than C-class property for comparison. In some cases, this is a great option. In other cases, it's not. And that's one of the things we help you do, is understand your property and what might be right for you. So we typically get proposals for both of those services, and then we make help you make the right decision for your property. So that's one way you can present savings to your residents. Now, when it comes to the other utilities, depending on what market your property is and how much usage you have for electric and gas, there is the potential for electric and gas savings, and likewise trash removal savings. But that comes down to what market and how large it is. For a 20-unit property, there is not going to be a lot of savings in any one of those. For a 400-unit property, in some place like Texas or Ohio or one of the deregulated states for energy, where you have multiple pools, you have common areas, you have workout facilities, and your electric usage is higher, we can generate some savings there, but it just comes down to how much. And so those are all things we look at. And is there revenue savings or is there expense savings available? Yes, but it really comes down to, just as when you go buy a property, every one is different. Every single one you look at is different. What's the market? What's the employers around you? There's so many factors that go into it. The same holds true with utilities. And so I've got somebody who just bought a 29-unit property in Cleveland, Ohio, and we're just going down the checklist. Okay, what can we do? How can we help? Is there anything we can do on any of these? And so we'll just go down the checklist, and some of them doesn't apply. Others, there's a possibility. And that's what we do for our clients. It's just, we like to do a free assessment. We have a no obligation free assessment at the very beginning. Just give us the property name, the primary address and number of units, and we'll come back to you and say, this is what we think you can do, or we can do for you if you'd like us to move forward. That's usually how we begin the relationship.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Like you said, not all these solutions are going to make sense for all types of properties, and some of them are specific to the class of property. You talked about A-class being a better candidate for that bulk because there's a certain risk involved for that owner, right? They're on the hook, like you said, for 100% of those units. So if there's a significant amount of vacancy or whatever, that the onus will be on them, and that's going to hurt their NOI. All right. You talked about being able to do this kind of audit for folks and look at the different options that are available and see which ones make sense for their respective properties. At what phase does it really make sense for property owners to engage with you? Is it when they're looking to buy a property, or is it once they're under contract, or after everything is closed and the dust is starting to settle?
We would rather be involved too early than too late, right? Because if we're too early, then we can say we don't know these things just yet. But if we're too late, then it's hard to recover from that. So I've had people say, look, I'm looking at buying this property. Is there anything you can tell me? Here's some of the information I've received. Can you look at it as well and see if you think there's anything? Because a lot of times when they're trying to buy that property, they're looking to pro forma it and see, where's my opportunities? What can I do with this property? And so sometimes we can help advise on that. So I say it's never too early.
Yeah. And like you've been saying, it sounds like a lot of what you're talking about could have a material impact on the income side of that pro forma. So definitely worth looking into that, because it could mean the difference between a deal that's okay and a deal that's pretty good.
Yeah. The other thing, Tim, I'll tell you is that a lot of times people don't think to look in the due diligence for a cable or an internet contract, right? There could already be some in there. I've had people that just don't want the liability of bulk service, buy a property and find out later that there's a bulk agreement there. Whereas if they'd have come to me ahead of time and said, what can you tell us about this? I'd have been able to say, oh, wow, there's a bulk deal here. I know you guys don't like it. So here's what I'm going to recommend. If you don't want that bulk deal in place, don't assume it and force as a condition of the sale of the closing, the prior owner to get out of the bulk agreement, which they can often do by buying out of it. Now, it's a little expensive and may have an impact, but at least they know, at least they have options. We've also had instances where, let's say that one-time upfront payment I talked about that owners can get for signing a 10-year agreement. I've had owners where they bought a property and they found out later that there was an agreement in place. And oh, by the way, the prior owner a year ago got $20,000. And yet I'm on the hook for 9/10 of that agreement. What if I'd have known that and been able to say, hey, look, we want a prorated portion of that 20. Since we're taking on 9/10 of the agreement, 90%, we are asking for 18,000 of that to be sent to us. And even if the owner says, no way, I already invested it back in the property, at least you've got a little extra bargaining chip or however you want to use that. And you can then say whether or not it's material enough to fight over or not, but at least you have that information that we can help identify for you.
And I think that's really important. What you hit on is that uncovering of some of those things that you may not be aware of unless you knew to ask the right questions. And someone like you coming in and knowing what to look for can uncover a deal that's already in place that makes you culpable for that bulk, right? That expense that you may not have put into your underwriting and therefore could, again, materially change the numbers on your deal. Or maybe you're leaving money on the table because, like you talked about, the previous owner got all the benefits of that upfront lump sum and then sold a year later. It's not exactly fair. And so it puts you in a better bargaining position, even if, like you said, you may not get all of it, but it gives you the knowledge and the ammo you need to go into those negotiations better armed. All right. We've talked about a lot of awesome stuff. I know I've learned a lot myself on this process, which is important because, like I said, I have properties that are implementing this right now as we speak, but we do need to move on to the turbo round.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you 3 questions that I ask every guest on this show, and I just ask you for a quick, honest answer. All right. The first question, what is one red flag every investor should look out for?
If they're told that there's no contract in place, dig deeper. Most of the time there is. I cannot tell you how many times we've found contracts when they've been told, oh no, there's no contract.
Yeah, because like you said, a lot of these contracts have a 10-year timeline. Is that right?
Yeah, it could have been 2 owners ago. Exactly. And they didn't get it. Just because they didn't get it in their due diligence didn't mean it didn't exist. So if you're told there's no contract, dig deeper.
There you go. All right. And second question, what is a myth about this business that you would like to set straight?
The biggest one, I think we already talked about a little bit, is that there's the myth that if you aren't paying for the service, you don't need a contract and there's no value or no importance to having a contract. And I think we talked through how there really is a benefit to having a company.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Final question. What does success look like to you?
For me, success is, and I actually wrote about this in my book, is an ongoing development process. Success is never an achievement. Success is a journey. Success is part of learning and growing and moving on. And for me, success has to do with, I've got a personal mantra, right? And it outlines 9 points that are important to me. And one of those is, if I can quote a Dave Matthews song here, Dave Matthews, I'm a huge Dave Matthews fan. He's got a song called Why I Am, right? And so success is for me is defining why I am. Why am I living this life? Why am I here? And part of that is helping others. So when I can help others, and I love educating new investors on the opportunity that this exists, that makes me successful. And so I think there's a difference between being successful and realizing success. And for me, success is part of the ongoing journey. So sorry, you touched a very passionate topic of mine. So
no, that's great. And I think it just goes to the point that a lot of people believe that success is not an end state, right? Like you talked about, it's more about continuous growth. Never stop learning, never stop growing. That's how and I can't even say become, because then it sounds like you get somewhere, but it never ends, or it should never end anyways. All right, Kevin, hey, this has been awesome. Please tell our guests how they can get a hold of you, and if you have anything else that you'd like to share with them.
yeah, no, I thank you, Tim. I've really thoroughly enjoyed this, and I'm disappointed our time's up. But yeah, we're at multifamilyutilitysolutions.com. My email is kevin@multifamilyutilitysolutions.com. So the one thing I'll tell you is we work on commission. If we don't generate revenue or savings for you, we don't get paid. So if you have questions, there's no cost, there's no retainer, there's no hourly rate. Let us help you and then decide whether or not it's a good fit.
All right, awesome. We'll have all that information in the show notes. I appreciate you coming on, and definitely look forward to continuing to see you do big things on your journey to multifamily millions.
Thanks so much, Tim.